Welcome to Raising Financially Fit Families with Joline Godfrey podcast. I'm your podcast producer, RJ Malik. Hello, Joline. How are you today?
I'm terrific. Happy to be here.
Yeah, excellent. I see you have a guest, but before we get to your guest, why don't you tell us what your topic is for today?
Well, Jen Fox and I are going to talk about financial readiness in children, and we're going to zero in a bit on why it's important, or if even it's important, given the invisibility of money and the presence of AI today. So that's where we're going to begin.
That sounds good, and it sounds very important in this day and age and how technology is just advancing so quickly.
Sadly, it is faster than our poor, sad human brains can incorporate many days. So, yeah, it's important.
Okay, very good.
So, Jen, I'm thrilled you're here. And before we get too deep into the conversation, I do want the listeners to know that you and I are both friends and colleagues, and you've been in the industry for a long time doing a number of really cool roles in the wealth industry. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll jump into our topic?
Sure. And thank you, Jolene. I'm happy to do this podcast with you. So, I have been in wealth management for most of my career, and really in wealth management as a CFP and a financial planning professional. So, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of clients who are asking the question of, am I okay? And how do I ensure that my children are okay as they're growing up with money and trying to understand it and convey that education to them? I'm also a mom. So I have two children who are now almost completely flown the nest. So young adults who are forging their own way very successfully. So I've had the opportunity to see how financial education and talking to my children at a very young age has actually impacted them as they are now on their own financially.
Whoa. And no surprise if they're about ready to fly the nest. When you started with them, the financial landscape was very different, and the whole world of the internet,
Mhm.
social media almost probably didn't exist. And I think that's one of the things I'd love to hear from you. How has it changed over time, and how is that affecting the families you've worked with?
So what's interesting for me, and I think about this all the time, is Google is 3 days older than my son.
Wow.
So to think of, that time before him, the time before, how prevalent Google is, how prevalent technology is, in some ways they've grown up together. And I think that seeing the excitement of Google when it was first launched, I don't think we fully understood the impact or the possibilities or the opportunities that technology would have for our children. We saw these great kind of leverage opportunities of ways to talk to them, ways to communicate. But now seeing after 25 years of Google, and not to pick on Google, but technology overall, of how it's really impacting the conversations that we need to have. And so I think that while there's a lot of benefits to it, what I found perhaps more challenging is that the disconnect of the conversations that we have around money, and that going to AI or to an app or just even a Google search isn't going to give you the background of values, kind of why we have money, how we believe in money, what we should do with money. And so I do think that we're learning together of what this impact is, but it's reinforced for me how important it is to have the conversations of the why and who we are as a family, who we are as, contributing members of society, and how money is a tool that can enable us to do those great things.
Boy, I'm so in agreement with you. And as you talk, I find that information about the 25 years of your son growing up with Google kind of a breathtaking piece of data, because I'm sure some of our listeners are thinking, oh yeah, that is what's been going on. In parallel with that, I suspect that in the early days, you and Dave, you and your husband were clearly the authority. And as time went on, my observation is that the authority gets undermined by all these other resources that come in through, again, not to pick on Google, but through Google and everybody else on social media. I'm wondering what you have learned or what your feeling is now about how we coach families to compete when their authority. I mean, I remember the chorus in my head is still my parents saying, because I said so. I mean, talk about the ultimate authority. I'm sure a number of us grew up with that. That just doesn't fly. I don't even know that I've heard that phrase in many years. But I think there is some real loss when the people who really do care about your best interest, and I would call that parents, are undermined by all these other voices. What has your experience been, and what do you tell other families?
Well, I think it is undermined as much as we allow it and not participate in those conversations with our children. Uh, the thing that I've realized in talking to a lot of families and experience it on my own is that as parents, we will always be the first teachers for our children. Um, and they are sponges. They have wide eyes and look and see what we do, what we talk about, how we behave, even when we think that they're not watching. They are listening and paying attention. So I think that recognizing the importance that parents have in children's lives throughout their lives is the counterbalance to technology. It's one that we do need to embrace it for them to become, successful citizens and understanding kind of the potential of AI and all of those developments. But AI, for example, um, it doesn't have emotions, it doesn't have values, and it doesn't have feelings. It can sound like it, but it doesn't. So, how are we as parents conveying those messages to our children every day? So, I think about, and I've had these conversations with families as well, is that some of the earliest money lessons are when you're shopping with your children. And they're not seeing necessarily dollar bills or coins anymore. They're seeing credit cards or kind of swipes or apps. So it's different. We don't have that tangible feeling of money. But when you're in a store with a child, it's really important to think of what lessons you're communicating to them. I like to think of Target mainly because they have a really nice toy section. And I know with my children, I couldn't get through a Target without a, um, can I get this? Can I have this? What can I do what can I do to get this particular toy? And finding ways to educate your children, even if they're as young as 4 and 5, of no, we don't just buy a toy because you want to. Here's a way that you can save money. Here's the way that you can choose to spend your money. And those lessons, while may seem small, really build over time. And there's a lot of tools that can support that, of being able to explain what money is. But I think, that is for me, the conversations I like to have with, parents and grandparents, of that the money lessons are starting when they're in a store with you, when they are spending time with you, and when you're commenting and talking about what's important to you.
I think both of us probably have struggled over time, but it sounds like you intuitively started really early with your children. And over the course of my career, over and over, I have families come talk to me, but their kids are already 16, 17, 18 years old. How, over the years, have you been able to engage parents to think about starting a conversation or starting awareness, at least, much earlier? Because I think that's still a very hard thing for families who look at those darling little children and think, oh, they're so cute. I don't want to bother them now. I mean, what do you say?
Like I said, they learn early. And I do think that the lessons learned very early are the ones that they build off of and interpret as you go along. So, and I'll just give my own example, and I've shared it with a lot of families, is that, that Target example, and you could just insert store name here, that you go to.
Right.
um, it started creating, conflict and arguments and challenges that, quite candidly, if I look back on it, wasn't my best parenting day. And it's hard to be a parent, but when you have a child who's now whining in the store or complaining, it doesn't bring out your best parenting. Um, and I started to look for solutions. And so it's really hard to teach financial literacy when children are learning, math still. But there was a tool that I used, and there's a number of them now, but it was basically a savings app. And this was before the kids had their phones. So I had it on my phone, but I explained it to them. We are going to, as part of a member of this family, we're going to give you an allowance. And the allowance wasn't tied to chores or anything like that. It's just as a part of being a member of the family, we are going to give you money to spend. And with that, you need to, child, make good decisions about how you want to spend your money. So we let it build up over time. I instituted what I called mom interest because I wanted to begin to explain some of the financial concepts. Now, granted, mom interest, I would love to find out in the marketplace because it was pretty aggressive. But when you're giving, a couple dollars of an allowance, you need an aggressive mom interest to make it worthwhile.
Right.
But what I found is that we would go through that on a regular basis. And when I would go to the store and they'd ask if they could get a toy, I would say, how about we check the app and see if you have enough money to buy that purchase? And so I remember my daughter in particular was really excited about a particular item. And she looked at the app and saw how much money she had. And the toy was almost all of the money. And she said, I don't think I want it that badly. So it wasn't that she didn't want it, but she didn't want it that badly and said, I'm going to wait, which for a young child to say, I'm going to wait is important because I do think it separates needs versus wants. And when you're 5 or 6 years old, needs has a very different definition than it will as you get older. But it helped to instill some of that pause and patience. And for me, as a mom in the store, it helped really eliminate a lot of that friction and stress of I want it, I need it. And it was more of, can I buy it right now? Or what can we, when will this build up so that I can?
You remind me of how closely needs and wants ties to identity. So I think of parents whose children can literally almost have anything their heart desires because they have the resources to pay for it. And if the parent's been traveling a lot, or they haven't seen the child a whole lot lately, or the child really puts a hard press on, they really want that thing, it's so easy to just say, okay, honey, no problem. Um, but you see over and over how kids who are not forced to make choices somehow end up wondering what matters. It becomes almost existential. If anything is possible, what's really important? Um, and I think it then falls to the parent to really set the boundaries, to make clear the questions so that kids can make choices that help them understand who they are fundamentally. Um, I've been struck in the conversations you and I have had. Your kids seem to know very well who they are. I've not picked up any ambiguity about that. I mean, how do you think that struggle unfolded for them?
I think that, again, what's hard, about parents is that you're always, in my experience in working with other parents and other families, my own internal struggle is that you always want to do a good job for your children. You want them to grow up and be good people. Uh, but I think that where we get tongue tied a little bit is in talking about money. And I think that that conversation starts well before we're talking about numbers.
Mm,
And so I mentioned the numbers when it comes to purchasing things, but what my husband and I realized as our children were in their preteens and teens is that that identity was becoming another developmental challenge for them of who am I, what's important to me. And at the same time, benefiting from my own professional work, um, my husband and I were on vacation, and the two of us sat down and did values exercises together, and made it a vacation conversation. And we learned so much about each other and how we approach life. We'd been married for quite a while at the time, and we still were learning new things about what made us tick. And through that, we said, you know what, we should really do this with our kids. Like, give them the cards, because we had cards that enabled us to have this conversation. Let's give them the cards and see what they determine their values are. And then let's talk about it. So here we are on vacation, and at dinner one night, we talked about what everyone's top values were. It was such a powerful, powerful dinner. I think our dinner went 3 hours, and our kids were, preteen teen. We learned so much about them and their thought processes and what they valued that it was really enlightening for my husband and I about who these people were that we are now raising. And the benefit from this conversation is as they are explaining what's important to them, it really enabled us to have kind of keys to their teenage years. So, as an example, my daughter, and it was not a surprise to us, my daughter had one of her values is being independent. And that she wanted to, and it was really self-reliant was the name of the value that she looked at. She's like, I want to be self-reliant, which is fantastic, having, a 12-year-old tell you that they want to be self-reliant. But it also gave us another clue for her, is that she wanted to be so self-reliant that she wouldn't often ask for help. And that's where our frustration came in. So by learning this with the values conversation, it enabled us to have discussions and conversations in really tense times that kind of took the arguments out and made it a conversation.
Wow, that is an incredible moment of insight that you then can, like jujitsu, use to your own advantage as a good parent. It does call for a certain level of self-awareness, which clearly you and Dave have. I can imagine somebody listening to us today saying, yeah, that sounds good, but where do I begin? Um, and that is it's a tough question. And obviously it's one we're going to be exploring on this podcast over and over and over again. But um, as I look ahead, I'm curious, what next for your adult kids? I mean, they are now in another transitional place. What is the support that you're hoping to give them now when it comes to navigating the financial world at a very strange time in our lives?
Yeah, and they're making, big decisions, renting apartments, taking jobs. I think that what's been great about this is that we've created the language for those conversations, and so we can talk about that. It's also, I think, we're at a stage of their young adulthood that it's respecting their decisions, and helping them go through the decision process. So I think that, they're confident, they're independent. We have been so fortunate and kind of they've had good experiences and have been able to navigate difficult situations well. Um, they're still going to run into difficulties and challenges with jobs, but we've made sure that we create that open conversation so that we can help, they can bounce ideas off of, we can give them advice when it's wanted. And hopefully that will continue. I'm not here saying that like we've been perfect parents, hardly. And we'll continue to have our bumps and bruises as we go along, our lives together. But I do think that I'm very proud of the fact that we've created this relationship with them. I've utilized our experience in talking to other families and have heard kind of other families embracing kind of the values conversation, some of the tips, that we've shared. And I've seen positive results from other families as well. So it's something that, as you said, where do you start? Start,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I think it's starting, today, right now, thinking about how you want that relationship to be.
Jump in. Yeah. As we sort of come to a natural transition in our conversation here, because this is going to be an ongoing conversation. You do remind me as you talk about language, which I want to close on because I think it's so important. So often, I think families have called me and invited me to come work with their family. And I know that they expect I'm going to show up with spreadsheets and calculators as tools to teach their kids about money. And it took me a very long while in the early days of my work to understand I had to help them create a bigger language. It's not that those spreadsheets and calculators aren't important. It's that there's a much bigger language. And that's what you've been talking about here today. And I think that just jump in and talk um, is really the beginning for all of us. It's not easy, but it's essential, particularly with everybody talking at your kids today. So I appreciate your being here with us and getting us started on this conversation. And I hope if you're listening and any of this resonates, please check out our social media, contact both or either Jen or I, and that information will be on the website. Do visit the website, www.bounce-10.com. And we'll continue this conversation with you in it. So, Jen, thanks a whole lot. Sure, we'll pick this up again in some other ways soon. And in the meantime, have a great day.
Thank you. And we're looking forward to your next podcast. And thank you for listening to today's Raising Financially Fit Families with Joline Godfrey podcast. Please like, follow, and share this podcast with friends and family. Until our next podcast, for Joline Godfrey, I'm RJ Malik.